Welcome to Somerset Success Strategies. Today we're going to start a two-part series that we're calling From Great to Gone. And it is an outgrowth of a presentation that I saw by Jim Collins. Now those of you that are familiar with Jim know that his first book was called Built to Last. And the premise of Built to Last was basically how were iconic organizations originally formed and how did they sustain their enduring success over decades or even centuries. Now, as an aftermath of that work, people began to ask Jim the question, well, Jim, that's great to know how these iconic organizations have formed and sustained themselves, but that doesn't really help me as I am trying to lead my average performing company towards greatness. And how do you make that shift from good to great? Well, that led to Jim's next research project, which culminated with him publishing From Good to Great in the early 2000s. Now, since then, a couple of the good to great companies have fallen from grace. Notably Fannie Mae and Circuit City. So that led Jim and his research team to the new question of what causes a company to fall from grace or to shift from great to gone. Another project that Jim has been working on in light of our current turbulent economic times is a question of, can you make the shift from good to great during challenging economic times, or could you have a return to greatness during challenging economic times? And we're going to handle that answer in the second part of this two-part series. So today we're going to focus on the causes of making the shift from great to gone. Now, as a prerequisite to talking about those, Jim started his presentation with some basic Jim Collins 101 to give us a little bit of foundation. One of the things he wanted to remind us of is the whole concept that good is the mortal enemy of great. And one of the biggest obstacles to us becoming great is our goodness. That alone is a significant obstacle because for most of us, good is simply good enough. The other thing that he wanted to remind us of is that greatness is a matter of conscious choice and discipline, not of circumstance. So it's not about being lucky or being in the right place at the right times. Greatness isn't a matter of circumstance. It is a matter of conscious choice and discipline. And lastly, he wanted to remind us that greatness is a cumulative and never-ending process. Now, what did they discover is the answer to the question of what causes the shift from great to gone. Well, essentially, it's something that they've called corporate cancer. And that the corporate cancer is self-inflicted, not caused by outside forces. So it's kind of the opposite of what causes greatness. We said it wasn't circumstance, it was conscious choice and discipline. Well, what causes the fall from grace? Well, again, it's not circumstances, it's not these outside forces, it really is self-inflicted. It comes from the inside out, not the outside in. Now, in this corporate cancer, you can look perfectly healthy organizationally on the outside. You can still be meeting your quarterly earnings targets. You can still be generating positive cash flow and not necessarily see that on the inside you're actually becoming very sick. So one of the ways that you have to combat corporate cancer is to have a different set of metrics, a more real-time set of metrics that doesn't wait for the lagging indicators of profit and cash flow, because by the time those become noticeable, you may be in a very late stage of the organizational cancer, which will make it much more difficult to combat. Because it's really in these last stages of corporate cancer that it becomes apparent to the outside world how sick you've become on the inside. But again, the good news is you can recover almost no matter what the stage is It's just the further you are into the sickness, obviously the more difficult it is going to be to have the return to greatness. But you can ultimately return to greatness if you take the appropriate action. So just as is the case with physical cancer, with corporate organizational cancer, early detection systems are the key. Now, in the event you're already in a crisis that has been caused by this organizational cancer, again, the good news is that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and that sometimes the crisis itself is maybe almost necessary, even with early warning, even with people throwing up some red flags, that sometimes it really takes crisis to move people and provide the impetus to action, and that it isn't too late, and that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Now, the data that Jim and his team compiled and analyzed indicated that the causes for this organizational cancer and these fall from grace and these shifts from great to gone were really two things. One, inconsistency, and two, overreaching. Now, this flies in the face of conventional wisdom that might have said it would have maybe been complacency, that it's simply because we've taken our foot off the gas or we've become fat, dumb, and happy. But that's not what the research bore out, that really it was chronic inconsistency caused much more mediocrity than an unwillingness to change. Secondly, overreaching. Well, what is overreaching? What are signs of overreaching? Well, what Jim refers to is Packard's Law, which basically says that you cannot sustain a growth curve where you outgrow your internal management bandwidth. That is the bottleneck or the limiting factor. Your business model may not retard your growth. You may have plenty of capital, but the real problem is, do you have the internal management bandwidth, or are you overreaching? So to make sure that you have answered the who questions before you answer the what questions. Do you have the right people on the bus and in the right seats? And that is the way that you can avoid overreaching. So the bottom line of the data suggested that ingestion of too much change causes more organizational cancer than the starvation from too little. So it's not an unwillingness to change, it's not lack of opportunity that creates organizational cancer. Far more often it is too much change caused by either chronic inconsistency of changing our initiatives too frequently every month or every quarter and not giving them time to flourish and work, and this whole idea of too much change caused by overreaching or exceeding our internal management bandwidth. So those are the results of Jim's team's study and analysis of what causes this fall from grace. So we would love to hear from you. What are the key metrics and measures that you use to be able to have an early detection system to find out about these organizational cancers and combat them early in the process? We would love to hear from you. Thank you.